State legislators are considering a bill to determine when local communities should cooperate with deportation requests from the federal government. Some local authorities say this should only happen if unauthorized immigrants are a threat to public safety, but others say there should be more cooperation with immigration enforcement. Our guest is one of the co-sponsors of a bill to set boundaries in a Trust Act for Massachusetts. We'd like to welcome the state representative from Dorchester, Evandro Carvalho. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to be back here.
You have an interesting mix of backgrounds in this, as an immigrant and as a former prosecutor.
Yes, I do, which is, I think, why I'm in this, right? I think it's a fight that I need to be part of because I think, I should mention, you know, being born and raised in Cape Verde, and growing up in Dorchester, and being a prosecutor gives me a unique set of experiences to kind of try to sift through, you know, all what's going on and see if we can come with a common ground to do something that can sort of please everyone.
Well, right now, what happens is, let's say, if for some reason an unauthorized immigrant gets picked up by local authorities, what happens?
Now, the thing that we need to be aware about in terms of what's going on, right, with the bill, right, which we call it Trust Act bill, which, as you said, I'm part of, one of the lead sponsors in the House, at least, is that it really, okay, so it tells local officials, that is law enforcement, whether, you know, Boston Police or state police, since it's a state bill, it's statewide, right, that we shouldn't participate in what the federal government has now, ICE particularly, what's called now a PEP program, right, which essentially is a direction, sort of quote unquote mandate by the federal government saying that hold the person that you have, right? So usually what happens is, to go back to your question, is somebody gets picked up, anybody that gets picked up has to do a fingerprint, right? That fingerprint gets sent to the FBI, you know, historically, that's just what happens. The FBI sends to ICE agents who look through and say, hold that person, hold this person, hold this person, hold that person. So we're saying that we don't want our law enforcement, at least the bill and what the intention is to say that we don't want our law enforcement to participate on this massive sort of, you know, deportation efforts, right? And it's, if you think about it, you know, the policy, where it's coming from. We live in Massachusetts, which is not on the border, right? And I think it's estimated that at least 1 million, and the population of Massachusetts is 7 point, you know, going to 8 million now, that at least 1 million of those are immigrants, right? And those are just people that are immigrants that are not, you know, grandsons of immigrants, right? So imagine the capacity, the amount of impact that this kind of program has on our communities on a daily basis. And again, it's not that they're saying, help us get the heavy criminals, even though they'll pull it out as such. The new program called PEP really supposedly has priorities, and not supposedly, that's what the memo says from Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, saying that we prioritize people that are threats to national security, people that have major criminal convictions or felonies and so on. So I don't disagree with that, right? What happens is, just as prior program, which was known as Secured Communities, I believe, and PEP is the new name as of November 2014, it's supposed to target these individuals, right? So, but we see the data that comes out is, for instance, back in April, and I'll look at one data back in that suggests that at least two-thirds of the people that were picked up had no criminal convictions at all, right? So these are families that are being ripped apart, right? And it happens in my community, it happens in your community, it happens throughout the state. So are we, and I believe that Massachusetts in particular, for what we stand for, you know, history of immigrants, you can't talk to someone in Massachusetts who can't say, especially politicians, right? You know, I'm a grandson of someone who came in 1920s, 1940s. We all somehow are immigrants, right? So we, and Massachusetts has been leader in so many issues. Again, I like to say this is, you know, from gay marriage to health care to various other issues. We're a beacon of freedom to some extent. So we're saying that we're okay for them to come and just rip our families apart. Now, if they want to target certain individuals that have been here, that commit crimes that shouldn't be doing, things they shouldn't be doing, yes. But I don't condone And I don't believe as a state we condone just ripping, the mother that working 2 jobs just because she got picked up on a random thing. Now, all of a sudden, the ICE is involved and families are being ripped, and we don't even have enough information from them about what's happened. So, I mean, there's a separation, there's a system in place for a reason. ICE is the arm to enforce federal laws, immigration laws, and they can do it.
What's the standard you would set for when a local community should hand somebody over?
The people get deported no matter what, right? People get deported on a daily basis. Oftentimes you hear the story anecdotally about they're coming into your home at 4 a.m. So that happens no matter what. And I think local police often are involved in those, right? If I had, if I could draw up a plan, put it that way, right, of a compromise, is can we focus on those individuals that are terrorizing the communities? And oftentimes, in fact, in the memo the secretary talks about gang violence, some of the individuals heavy hitting gang violence, national security. Folks that, priority, number one, can we help with those? Yes. I personally think we should. But if we're talking about someone that has no criminal record and you don't even have a removal order from a judge just being picked up, and you come get them and hold them 48 hours and all these different things, I don't think I honestly don't think that I can agree with that.
Chris, the other concern you have in your own district in Dorchester and parts of Roxbury is that if police are investigating a violent crime, they need to talk to people, they need people to talk to them. A lot of these people are immigrant families who have, who knows, all kinds of different kinds of status. So I suppose
that's one of the key things, the reason why this bill was filed. It's really to try to build trust among the police in the communities that they represent. And as you know, in America where we live now today, right, the communities of color in particular, black men, we see videos every day. We don't need to go into the details of that, but that's the nature. And oftentimes within the communities, there's people, again, when you talk about immigrants, they come from every part of the world at this point, right? So if they know, and the immigrant communities, oftentimes they're not embedded, they don't know what's going on, right? They just know that their family was taken away. They're not reading the memo, and they don't know, exactly where and how things are happening. So once you know that your friend who works with you, or a colleague that worked in a factory, more likely than not with you, disappeared on a thin air, then that affects how you deal with the police. And in a community that, especially now, how sensitive things are in the communities of color, in the police, I think we don't need an added layer of fear amongst the communities that we serve.
There's another kind of trust bill that you're also working on, and this concerns the investigation of shootings by police. Currently, these are investigated by the DA, the local DA,
yes,
and local police. So
yes.
Why do we need to change that?
That issue, it's been a forefront for all of us, right? We saw it, I think really Trayvon Martin, and more so Ferguson, right? What happened in Ferguson, what happened in Baltimore, what happened in New York, where individuals were, for some reason or another, I mean, in these situations that we're talking about, mostly people were shot, except for the guy in New York where he was choked to death, that, eventually, nothing happens with the police, right? That's really why we see so many of the, the chaos that's happened, from riots to, people in Boston here, protesting, because the way the perception is right now is that people, police officers, are killing individuals and getting away with it, right? For whatever reason. And one of the, especially out of Ferguson that came out, is that the DA is perceived, obviously, for good reason, and I know this as a former prosecutor, the relationship that the police needs to have with the DA on a daily basis is one that of trust. And that once the police is, I guess, alleged to have done something wrong, especially killing someone, that the DA comes in and just doesn't do a good job, independent job, especially a transparent job, because folks don't know oftentimes, especially when there's a grand jury, if there's a grand jury, oftentimes there's no grand jury. It happens and the DA just decides it's a good shooting, right? So what the bill that I filed, which is called the Special Prosecutor Bill, House 1227, I believe, it takes the the DA from the picture right away and inserts a special prosecutor, someone who presumably has to be someone with probably prosecutorial background, or someone that has an attorney, of course, that can investigate and then report too. There's the added layer of transparency, because we don't know never what happens with these things. Usually, from what I've seen, the DA types a one-page letter and sends it to the family and says everything was fine. So it's really whether, it's not really, conversation's been about whether they're qualified to do their job. It's not really, the justice system and the police, and it's about perception. And to some extent, the data too. It suggests, when you see somebody in New York choked to death and the guy, no charges, and for the public, especially when you're not dealing, you don't know the system well, with being arrested on a daily basis, and then this happens, and in Boston, you're like, oh, this is not us, so we don't have to worry. But we do, because young men and women of color, particularly in the city of Boston, when the majority of people of Boston are people of color, are dealing with these kinds of situations. They may not even, most of the time it's not involving death, but they're being posted, they're being what they at least perceive to be harassment, right? And then to know that they can just eventually get away with things, and that it causes a friction, again, another added layer of fear within the police and the community to represent. And now you can't go without a meeting with a police officer. It's not like, oh man, these young men, they can't, it's so disrespectful towards the police. Young men, 12, 13, 14-year-old, disrespectful. They just like want to take the video off, scream at the police, even though it could be something as close as what's going on, what can I do? There's that added, we don't trust you. So once you have a arbiter, right, an independent arbiter, then it kind of say, okay, if something happens, there is someone that I believe would be independent to investigate this.
Thank you very much for being with us.
It's always a pleasure, Chris. Thank you for all the work that you do for us.
Thank you. State Representative Evandro Carvalho.